welcome to the Next Canon podcast. My name is Danny Ray. I am your host, but you know that. What you don't know is our next guest. I'm so excited because today we have Meme Garcia on today. Say hi, Meme.
Hi, everybody.
This is going to be so fun. Meme Garcia goes by they, them pronouns, just so everyone's aware. Their show House of Sueños is currently out on podcast with Seattle Shakespeare Company. It's an adaptation of Hamlet. They just dropped the first episode on Wednesday, so check that link down in the description of this podcast and you can get all of that up in there. And they're also playing Romeo in Seattle Shakespeare's virtual production of Romeo and Julieta, adapted by Ana Maria, our good friend Ana Maria, who was on a few weeks ago, and directed by Sophie Franco. All the things. This is so amazing. Hi, Meme.
Hi, Danny.
How has life been for you recently?
You know, life has been as can only be expected in this profound moment of pause and change. I want to say something other than fine.
Right. As good as can be expected. Yeah. I've been calling it the pause as well, too. Like this weird pause that we're in.
Yeah, I just heard, I was in a meeting and someone used that. And I was like, I kind of like that, the pause. I enjoyed that.
Yeah.
I do feel like a pause.
It's also kind of like a weird shift that we've all had to go through. I was talking with Gloria Alcala last week, and they said, what did they say? It's gone from my brain. That we're still upside down. Mm-hmm. We're like, we haven't like recorrected yet because there's no way to at the moment for people who like to do theater.
Yeah, it's a bit of a, I like to think of it as a semicolon, if that makes any sense, right? I was like, there's that sense of pause, but we know that something's coming. So we just have to like shift in this moment of change. We have to shift a bit, but it has been a very hard time for theater artists. I mean, it's been a hard time for everybody. Jesus.
Yeah.
Damn.
Right.
400,000. That's a lot.
It's a crap ton and it's horrible. And like, we need to change now more than ever in literally every sense of the word and every area of our lives, pretty much. Nothing has gone untouched, you know?
No. And I think too about people have been, I think just recently kind of talking about shared trauma and collective trauma and how do we heal our shared trauma. And I think I'm like, well, at this point, I'm like, it's a day late and a dollar short, but I'm like, I guess it's better than never to talk about that.
Right.
But I have been thinking a lot about trauma and just like the effects that it has on the brain and the body and us as a society. Like, you know, in the United States, we don't really have a way of like collective healing, like collective grief, you know? Right. I think I'm from El Salvador, right? And so in El Salvador, like if someone dies or you go to a funeral, it's like you're over at their house, you're making food, you're mourning together. And even in the pandemic, you can't do that, right? In El Salvador. But here in the States, it's like that culture, it just doesn't, it's not really present, the idea of collective grief. And me mourning for you and you mourning for me. It's not something that I think Americans really experience.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a really good point because like a lot of like US American culture is like compartmentalizing things and people holding in and saying, I'm fine, I can go to work, I'm fine, I'm not dying inside, like things like that. The I'm fine, you said I don't want to say I'm fine earlier. It's like the thing we use to put little walls up, you know?
Mm-hmm. And then think about how much that influences like the theater world, right?
Yeah.
In terms of the show must go on, 10 out of 12s, tech week, just that exhaustion. I'm like, wow, we really have come, like if I have having a horrible day, I have a lot of mental health challenges. And if I want to come into the room, I have to leave all that stuff at the door, right? That's like, I'm sure that was a part of your training.
That's right? A saying for sure.
It's a saying, right? It's like, you got to leave it at the door, leave it at the door. And I'm like, oh my gosh, at some point I've left so much stuff at the door that I have no idea who I am anymore when I get into the room.
Right. It's like, I feel like that's the thing you kind of have to fight against because you're never not going to be you. You know what I mean? No matter how much we put on other names and dialects and clothes, like you're always you with a hint of Romeo, or you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like you're always you with a hint of yada yada.
Well, and
So
it's especially prevalent for BIPOC folks and trans folks, right? Because our bodies, we don't get to just hang them up at the door and go on stage, right? Like I walk on stage and I will always be fat. I will always be trans. I will always be Salvadoran. There's no like, you can't take that out of the equation, I think, in the way that like white actors get to do. White cis actors,
yeah.
men.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's the expecting people too that gets me. You know what I mean? There's no way, you know?
And I think that's what makes, you know, we're talking today about like canon, what that means or whatever. And I think why representation is so important is because the body is political. No matter how you try, the body is a political statement. And for some people, it's more political, right? Because the majority has a very specific opinion about what that body should be doing, what that body shouldn't be doing.
Right.
And I feel like that's one thing that I always talk about is I'm like, if we just have better representation, we can begin to kind of like understand and rip apart what quote unquote traditional means or what quote unquote like neutral means and tell a better story.
So since we bring up the canon, what does canon mean to you, or like what's your relationship with the word canon?
You know, canon to me means something very Gen Z. I don't know. I am not Gen Z. I am solidly a millennial. So, but watching TikTok, they're like, "Oh, that's canon," and I'm like, "What? Like Shakespeare?" You know what I mean? Like, I'm like, I think so I know and I don't know. I understand that like we have a biased set of plays and of stories that we like to continuously tell. But the only canon that I'm very familiar with is William Shakespeare's canon.
Yep.
Just because I am a Shakespeare expert, I guess that's what my niche is Shakespeare. So I don't really know.
A lot of people have said things like, one of my favorite definitions is, I learned it like 4 years ago, so I'm not like a canon expert, but like it's the collection of plays that we all know and have access to, in my opinion. That's what I see it as.
Mm-hmm.
And that Shakespeare canon is a very solidified one. And you can also have like the DC canon, like like superheroes, you know, or the Marvel canon, like those things can't cross over, or like the MCU is actually coming up a lot more because of all of the Avengers movies and all of the like things like that. So like that's one of the ways that I've thought of it in my head. But it is like a really weird concept. Why do we have a set of shows like, why do we do White Christmas every year? That's definitely a canon one to me, you know, like why do we do one that came up the other day was Hello Dolly? Like, why is these things we know and like, but we're like, why?
It's funny that you're saying all these things because I have a very strange understanding of theater because until actually the beginning of the pandemic, I have no concept for musical theater. I've seen like 2 musicals in my life, and that's In the Heights when I was quite young, and then I saw Hamilton. And because I didn't go to a university that had any musical theater training, and I didn't do any, so I didn't even know that they turned Wicked into a musical. I always thought it was just a book.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome.
I know. So my really close friend, Roya Bacchus, I remember she found out, she was showing me this video. They were all singing some song from Wicked, I guess. And I was like, God, they all look like they're dressed like, like Wizard of Oz people. And she was like, yeah, we're doing a number, because she was choreographing a bunch of kids. She was like, they're doing a number from Wicked. And I was like, they turned that into a musical? So like there's a lot of stuff that I just straight up do not know. Like that's
awesome.
Hello Dolly, I've never seen it. White Christmas, never seen it. Like, so I have a warped, to me, I'm like, oh yeah, Buried Child, that's canon. Right? I'm like, that's a standard play that everybody's read, right? You know, I'm like Cloud Tectonics by Jose Rivera. Canon.
Oh, good one. That's a good one.
So those are the plays that like I know really well that I guess everybody knows.
See, I'm not a musical theater buff. I just know a lot of musical theater people, and that's why I've like brought those up. But like, yeah, that's so interesting. Your like training didn't have musical theater at all?
None of it. No, not at all. And then I didn't grow up in a house that was like particularly my mom was a fan of musicals, but also musicals were expensive. So like we never had a lot of money to just go like, my grandma liked musicals. And so I think as a child I would accompany her to musicals. And I did some musicals in high school, but I have no memory. I have a really bad long-term memory, so I have no memory of them at all. Like I know that I was in Urinetown, but I couldn't tell you for the life of me what Urinetown was about. Um and
That's a
yeah.
political one. That's a political
I
one.
know. I'm like, that should be canon. But that's my two friends at the beginning of the pandemic. I was we potted together, and they were like, "We are going to teach you musical theater history," and I was like, "Okay." And I watched a lot of musicals, and I was like, "Wow, okay, this is very fascinating." Yes, very fascinating.
So your niche is in Shakespeare. What other areas do you like dabble or like to work in?
Like in the theater realm.
Yeah.
I particularly enjoy, obviously, Latinx shows, Latinx plays, plays about Latinx identity. I also very much enjoy like, and I can't say I know a lot of this, which why because it's not that big of a genre, but I particularly love horror theater. I think it's
That's not
fascinating.
that big of a genre.
No, but I love it.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's so fun. I used to read horror books all the time, like just for excitement. Like it gets you like what's gonna happen next? Like, are they gonna die? Like
Yes,
scary
yes.
things. That's yeah. And I have a thing called aphantasia where you can't see images in your mind, which a lot of people are like, that's not a thing. Of course you can see images, but I've met a few other artists, but not that many who have it. Where it's like when I'm reading it, I don't have any of the fear because I can't see it. People are like, I can't
Wow.
read that. It's too scary. She's drowning under the water. And I'm like, yes, she's drowning under the water and conceptually. Like,
That's crazy. That's so cool.
Yeah, it's like it's a weird thing. People always lead you through visualizations as an actor. And it's kind of very hard to sit there and like, I remember one where we were supposed to imagine the numbers counting down from 9 to 1, and each of them had different attributes. Like, is it pink? Is it fluffy? And I'm like, I'm just gonna have to make a decision about that. This isn't like it doesn't just appear to me in this way.
Yes. Oh God, but those visualization exercises, I always just fell asleep.
Oh my gosh.
Every time.
My yoga class in freshman year, I fell asleep every day. Every single day. Doesn't matter what pose we were in, I was out. So in your canon, or any canon, since you know a lot of the shows and you just did a lot of research on some musicals,
I did.
what's your show that's got to go?
Well, I have two thoughts about this. One, a show that's really just got to go, just in general, is like any Shakespeare play led by like a straight cis white man. That just really has to just be gone. No, thank you. I'm just not interested at this point in my life. And a straight up show, a show that I did not like because I was not allowed to see it growing up was West Side Story. And I just watched it. And I do reckon, and the people I watched it with are really is it Sondheim? Sondheim?
I think so. But
I think Sondheim wrote it. This is what I'm saying. People are gonna just really be up in arms.
It's okay. I don't know either. So
got it. And so they were like, you have to watch it because the music is so incredible. The music. And I was like, okay, rad. And I know Sondheim, I guess, is Lin-Manuel Miranda is one of his big inspirations. And I watched it and I was like, this is physically hard to watch. I was like, it's like they had an idea of what being Latino was, and then they just like threw darts at it in the dark. It was just so hard. That movie was and it just is hard too because Rita Moreno is like one of the biggest stars that we have, and they put her in this horrible makeup. They put her in brown face for it, actually. And I remember her talking about it. She's got all these interviews where she was like, I wasn't Puerto Rican enough for them. And then, none of the leads, none of the Puerto Rican leads are Puerto Rican other than Rita Moreno. And there's like, I think maybe 3 or 4 Latinos in the movie in total. And I was just, and it just it doesn't sit right. And I'm also like, why is it always that Romeo and Juliet is the story that Latinos get? There's all these adaptations I feel like about, and I'm in currently Romeo y Julieta. And so, yeah, I just, I wasn't a fan. And it was also just really hurtful to watch a bunch of people like put on what they thought being Puerto Rican was,
Mm-hmm.
and what they put on what it meant to be Latino. And I was just like, yeah, y'all have never really met a Latino person, I think, in your life. But I wasn't allowed to watch it because my mom was like, that movie's racist. So I just watched it for the first time.
I love that your mom was like, absolutely not.
Yeah. No. My mom's like, we're not doing that. One thing, we're not going to do that. But the music is really beautiful. But I'm just like, and it feels like every time they do they're like, we're doing a remount of it, where it's going to be amazing. And there's always a problem. There's always something that goes wrong, and I'm just like, just write a new musical. I'm like, write a new awesome retelling of Romeo and Juliet that has like reggaeton in it, and it takes place in a disco, and it's really hot. It's like, and I'm like, and you write that.
Why not?
Yeah, just like, gosh. So that's the show. I think that's got to go, in my opinion.
100%.
I'm just always like, I just get frustrated when people who have no idea, no context of understanding for what the breadth and depth of a culture is, create a piece about it. And it's not that I'm saying that if you don't come from that specific background, you can't write about it, or, but I'm just like, the proof is in the pudding. And more often than not, people who don't have a cultural experience, when they write about that cultural experience, it's just not good.
Right.
I'm like, it hurts more, and I'm like, I'm sure at the time West Side Story was just an incredible feat. And I mean, heck, Rita Moreno got the justice she so deserved, but she didn't work for like 7 years. She didn't work for a very long time after that movie because of Hollywood's racism. And she was outspoken about it, and she also didn't work, And so I'm just like, and yeah, I could go on, but
you can go on if you like to.
Please do. I mean, and I've been thinking too about like these things that we just cancel them, or I've been thinking a lot about the anti-blackness in Shakespeare, right? Because Shakespeare has an immense amount of anti-blackness, anti-Semitism, homophobia, transphobia, misogyny. I mean, everything you could possibly think of, it's in Shakespeare. And I'm like, is there if we just cut these things out, right? If we just pretend West Side Story doesn't exist, right? I'm like, do we just excuse this, right? Do we just let, this racism go free, right? We just pretend like it doesn't happen. We put these blinders on. And part of me is just like, is there any point in doing it to be like, wow, look how far we've come. We have to hold these people accountable somehow. Mm-hmm. And then I'm just like, well, I think also there's this assumption that because of it's a canon, as to quote you, because of its canon, it's created by God, right? We kind of deify the people who created it. Mm-hmm. And we stop looking at it like a new text, because if Shakespeare was alive today and we were workshopping Hamlet, right, whatever,
right,
we'd be like, yo, dude, we got to talk about this misogyny in the play. It's really intense. And he would be like, you think it's too much? And we'd be like, yeah, man, it's too much. And he'd be like, okay. And you'd go back and rewrite it, right? Like we would hold people, or he'd be like, it's really important to me. The character of Hamlet is really delving into like what it means to be the masculine, what it means for the feminine, and that he's rejecting the feminine. And like, I want you to think that he's bad, right? Like we would be able to like hold these people and the characters and the writers accountable. But they're not in the room with us. I'm like, they're gone. Yeah. Like they're not here. So part of me is just like, how do we reckon with what they left behind, right? And I just don't think that there's enough reckoning with it, right? I don't think there's enough of like, this is racist. We have to talk about it. There's a lot of fear about talking about those things.
Welcome to the next Canon podcast. We're calling them out.
Exactly. Well, I just wanted to say too, like these problem plays of Shakespeare's, like The Tempest, Othello, Taming of the Shrew, Merchant of Venice. Like, while yes, I think it's important that we continue to look at them in a way, because as Americans who exist within a very specific brand of white supremacy, we tend to ignore racism, homophobia, anti-Semitism, and just pretend like it never happened. And so part of me is like, I feel like by stopping to do these plays, by just ignoring them, we just forget, right? And I think that I'm like, obviously really incredible things like Everything That Never Happened, which is an adaptation or a retelling, a remix of Everything That Never Happened in The Merchant of Venice. I'm like, we can't ignore the real trauma that a play like that has caused for generations and thousands of, hundreds of years. And so that's just what I wanted to come on and say too. It's just that these plays, while canon, the impact of them is something that we will carry for a very long time because of the negative stereotypes and tropes that they portrayed.
Truly. And you got to come at them a different way when you're thinking about that too.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's that's why I want to do this. Obviously, I say it every time as someone points out a new reason I wanted to do this sort of podcast, because if we don't like recognize, and we'll fall into that. I liked how you said a very specific brand of white supremacy, because it super is, and there's shame in it, and that's part of the culture of it, but it's got to be addressed.
And I feel like it's just for so long, like the people, marginalized folks who those plays like negatively affect have never really been invited to the table in a big way, as they are being now, and I was like, so like having indigenous folks a part of your conversation when if you decide to do The Tempest, having just these like diverse production teams and creative teams that can like really like think and speak, if they so choose, about the issues in those plays, I think is important, and we don't actually get that, but I think now we kind of are a little bit more and more.
That is such a good point, because like if we don't mention it, they just get a pass, like you said. Like, where's the growth if we don't actually talk about it?
And now I don't think that you have to do that. You're not going to solve every problem with every production. I don't think you should. And so often it's like up to the BIPOC creators and artists in the room to solve the problems, right? And I'm just like, so my thing is, I'm like, great, look at West Side Story, talk about West Side Story, and like come up with a better West Side Story, and because I do think that Sondheim's music is quite beautiful in it. I'm not a musical person, so I would not really understand nor really have any reference for why it's beautiful. But I was like, there's got to be some really cool young Sondheim out in the world right now who's just like, I want to make a play, and we could find them and invite them into the room.
We gotta find them. That's the whole thing. And on that note, what do you think needs to be in the canon? Where's our little Sondheims that we can bring into this canon?
Who do I think we should bring into the canon? Well, I mean, I just think that there should be more new work in the canon. I think also dancers. Like I just saw that my collaborator Wiley Basho-Gorin just showed us this piece called The Reviser, which is an adaptation of The Government Inspector that Crystal Pike, the choreographer, directed and choreographed. You can watch it on Marquee TV, and it's a dance piece. It's a full-on dance piece, but it is brilliant. And I feel like sometimes when we talk about theater, we leave behind lots of designers, lots of like choreographers, stage managers. And part of me is, I'm like, yes, obviously they're not plays. It's not a quote unquote play, but I'm like, they're a huge part of the creative process. And I just think that we should be bringing in more dance pieces, more fashion shows, right? Like more like awesome stage managers into our idea of what canon means. Because I think they are incredibly they are theatrical, they are theater. And without them, we wouldn't be able to do anything. So yeah, I would say that. I don't know if that's the right answer though.
Every answer is the right answer. Do you have any like specific things that sparked that in your mind, like as like a look out for this one specifically, or like this is what I mean?
This is what I mean. Yeah, I just watched this piece. OSF has this like little company within them, I guess. I'm not entirely sure how it works, called the Womb Collective, which is run by Jazz Hall. And all of it is like essentially queer BIPOC creators. And I just watched their piece last night. They did a live show with B. Steadwell, who's this, I want to say, musician out of DC. I'm not sure. And we watched a whole set, but it was very clear that B. Steadwell is a musician, but in it there was all these theatrical components of like interacting with the audience, being like, hey, let's talk about your daily affirmations. Like, I'm going to make music. I'm going to use this loop. Like, I'm dancing right now. Like, and it just was, I was like, oh yeah, this is canon, right? We have someone telling a story using a song, and there's an audience, and they're interacting with the audience. And I just feel like our perception of canon right now is like, is it a play? Does it have 3 acts? Like, does someone, die at the end? And I'm just like, no, I think the way that art is moving now is much more in this direction of holistic creation. And so everybody involved in that, from the designers, the stage managers, and now more than ever, right? Where it's like, I feel like some of the people who are seen, quote unquote, seen the most in this pandemic are maybe like actors doing Zoom readings. But I'm like, where are the stage managers? Where are the designers? Like, what are they doing right now?
Right.
So yeah, I'm interested just in general with the way that people have been figuring out ways to create. And even on Zoom. I mean, Zoom is canon right now. Heck, like hats off to Zoom.
Hats off to Zoom. Good job, you guys at Zoom. Yeah, it quickly gave a different style of platform to artists who are used to being in the space with hundreds of people at a time.
Yes. And think about, like, I never had any film training ever. I never got any film training in my career. And now I have film training from Zoom.
From Zoom. And self-tapes, probably.
And self-tapes.
Have you been doing them? You don't have them. Okay.
No. The majority of the work that I have been doing has been like self-driven, I would say.
Oh, nice.
Like, I'm like, okay, great. I want to do this. I'm going to do it. Or B, I want to write this. I'm going to write it. And just recently I've had kind of more of an opportunity to, obviously Romeo y Julieta. But there hasn't been a lot of like, a theater wants you. And I think that's been my big takeaway from the pandemic, is just being like, oh yeah, I have relied so often on theaters. I mean, I was a acting company member at OSF for 2 years. So I had like whole years of my life planned out doing a play. And I miss it. I'm not saying I really miss it. Oh, to the public, I miss it. But what's been kind of cool about this pandemic is like, how can I interact with a company as a producer? Or how can I act with a company as a creator? How can I like look and see, like, great, my friends, we have this whole month off. Nobody has anything for the month of April, let's say, right? So I'm going to be like, I have an idea. I have you've never done stage management, but you're going to be a stage manager. You've never done like lighting. You're going to be my light designer. We're going to do this all via Zoom. Or we're going to, ask people for donations. Like, that has been really exciting. Just generating for the sake of generating.
Right.
Because I always just was kind of like waiting for people to come to me. And I never really acknowledged the power that I bring into a space as a creator.
And that's a very powerful thing that you can bring in.
Exactly.
I love that. Like, month long, let's go. Like, let's get it going.
I mean, why not? I mean, I'm like, why? I mean, there are many why nots, right? Like, I have the privilege, and I live in a house with 2 other artists who are just as creative, if not more creative than me. And they're down for everything, right? I'm also in a town of like that exists with art. I'm still living in Ashland. So art is a huge part of this community because of OSF.
Right.
And I have like lots of people who are interested in what I have to say. So I'm just like, yeah, but I think that's something that I will take if and when we go back. I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot that, like, I always left that part of myself behind, or I didn't think it was important enough, or that aspect of just playfully creating, because it was a job.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm like, gosh, I miss that. And I'm excited, because I think that when we do come back, that will be something that people are very that the institutions, companies, theater orgs are really excited about. It's like, oh gosh, you've spent however long, maybe you haven't done anything, which is okay. That is also totally fine. But they're like, you spent all this time just like thinking and processing and, like checking in, checking out, checking in, checking out. We want that in the room. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I do have a question about being someone who likes to do adaptations. How's your relationship with that when they are super problematic?
You mean like West Side Story?
Like that, or like The Tempest or Taming, things like that. Those are ones we've talked about a few times, but
the Tempest is interesting to me. I did a research project on the Tempest, and I've always related to the Tempest, primarily because I look at the character of Caliban, and I look at where I come from, which is El Salvador, and I'm descended from Los Aztecos, which was a tribe that did a lot of bad shit because of the white men and gringo. And so I look at the character like Caliban. I'm like, God, here's Caliban, indigenous to this island. These white men come to the island, they plow him with liquor, and he thinks they're gods. And I'm like, that is such an experience that indigenous Latinx folks had, right? It's like we were just completely taken advantage of, and we relinquished the secrets, all of these things, and then there was this mass genocide. So I always see the Tempest as very much as a story that is about wholeheartedly the effects of imperialism, the effects of colonialization, and right on the edge of a genocide. And no one sees it like that. And I'm like, how do you not see it like that? It's right in the writing, right?
It's right there.
It's right. It's right there. And so at Taming of the Shrew, that is a problem play. I completely understand. I saw a production of it in London. It was an all-male production of it. And at the end, Kate, they're doing that toast, right? They're doing the toast. She's like, yeah, thank you so much for coming. Thank you. They all drink. All of them die.
Yes, someone said that once, and I was like, which?
Yeah,
that's the best thing.
I'm totally spacing, but it was, and she's the sole survivor. And that production was incredibly violent. I think because it was like men, there was this and there's a lot of exposed skin, so you saw grabbing and bruising and just and I remember being like, yeah, that's how you got to do it if you're going to do it at all, right? Now I don't know about Merchant. I'm not Jewish, so I feel like I can't necessarily speak to the anti-Semitism. If Jewish people say it's anti-Semitic and they don't want to do it, I'm like, great, there's a million other plays we could do. There's a really great play that OSF was scheduled to do this season, but they couldn't, called Everything That Never Happened in the Merchant of Venice. And it's about Jessica, Shylock, Lorenzo, and Gabo. So it's all the scenes that you don't get to see.
Oh, that's fun.
And written by Sarah Mantell. And it is beautiful. The most beautiful play. I was so sad. I mean, I'm sure it's going to happen in the future because that play is amazing. And Sarah, the author, the playwright, she's incredible. But I'm like, we wouldn't, that play wouldn't have happened if we hadn't have had Merchant of Venice, right? So I'm not saying at all we should do Merchant, because that is a problem play. But Everything That Never Happened is stunning and heartbreaking.
Yeah. And everything we've ever done led us here somehow. So there's obviously no going back. We can't fully erase anything. That's not the point of this conversation even. It's like the calling out of oh, there's better ways to do any of these stories.
Well, and it goes back to that conversation too, which is just we think of Shakespeare as a god. And I'm just like, no, the dude was a man, and men have faults. And I'm just like, so give these plays, use them as source material. You know what I mean? There's just too much preciousness. And I talked about this. I was at a board meeting with some company, and they were like, how do we get young people to see Shakespeare or whatever? And I was like, so often, and I'm sure you experienced this as well as when you were in training doing Shakespeare. It's like, do you have the right edition? Oh, that's not the right technique. Do you understand the scansion? That's actually a trochee, not a spondy. There's all of these techniques. And it's that those techniques are rooted in white supremacy. It's quite classist, right? It's you didn't have the right money to go to the right training to do the right thing. And I'm like, we think we're doing Shakespeare the right way, but it turns out to be just the white way. And I'm like, no, we got to just yes, obviously those things are important. And you're going to have a really awesome vocal coach who's going to be there, who's going to be like, hey, let's go work on this. Let's throw a ball back and forth, and we'll do this speech, and we'll work on it. And that'll be great. We'll act it. But part of me is like, why not just take Hamlet and, throw beat under it and rap? It's in 5/5, and no, Shakespeare's in 5/5 and rap is in 4/4, right? So you could just rap some stuff. Like, why not just start exploring new ways of looking at the text, new techniques, rather than just continuously shutting BIPOC people out of the conversation because for some reason they didn't have access to like the fancy training that you did.
Mic drop.
Right? So it's stuff that I've been thinking about a lot. But that's what House of Sueños is, right? This play that I'm writing, that I wrote.
Tell me about it. Tell them about it. Tell the people. Tell the people. What's it about?
House of Sueños is an adaptation of Hamlet. That it started off with a question where I was like, well, what would it look like if a concept for a Shakespeare play was not men in tights or wealthy WASP family from Maine or, you know, Havana in the 40s or the Prohibition. But what would it look like if a concept was your life, right? So you as Danny, right? The concept for, what's your favorite Shakespeare play?
12th Night.
12th Night, great. So the concept for 12th Night is your lived life. And you were like, how can I craft this play to fit my life, to suit my needs, right? So instead of me going to the play, I'm dragging the play to me, right? And so that's what House of Sueños started off. I was like, I have always seen myself reflected in Hamlet, and the rest of the world doesn't, which is so strange. Why is that? And I was like, I'm going to write myself into it. I might never play Hamlet professionally on the stage, even though it is a play I've done more than any other Shakespeare play. But I've never played Hamlet. But I was like, I see myself reflected in the epic nature of this specific story about a young man with really intense mental health traumas who is just trying to figure out how to avenge the death of his father. And the collateral damage he does as he makes his way through that show. But it's something that resonated really deeply with my story and the story of me and my sister and my family and my parents, and being, you know, my dad, my father, Luis, has been out of the picture. It's his birthday today, actually. Happy birthday, papi. He is in El Salvador. He's never lived in the States. He overstayed his visa when I was quite young and was essentially deported. So just like, it's never, he's been quite absent in the way that when I look at Hamlet and his relationship to his father, I was like, yeah, your dad was absent. You have all this trauma from it. So anyways, House of Sueños is a 5-episode audio drama. Was never intended to be an audio drama, but you know, the times. It's that kind of mirrors the 5 acts of Hamlet and my own life and all my nuclear family as well. And it's very macabre, I would say, eerie.
That's really cool and exciting. The first episode's up on. That's cool.
The first episode, El Regreso, is what it's called.
El Regreso. Okay, everyone, go listen to it. Watch it. Listen to it. Radio play.
It's a podcast.
Podcast. Hey.
Yes. So each episode is, but it's like a podcast radio drama.
That's so fun.
So each episode is like 25 minutes long. Megan Roach did the sound. Wiley directed and dramaturged it. He's been working with me on it since 2017. But this version that you're going to hear, I started working on it, I would say about 7 months ago. So
that's pretty epic. That's pretty epic, honestly.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
I love that. So that sort of actually just goes into the show promotion part of this. Like, we're promoting that one right now. Are there other pieces you're working on that you would like to promote, or other pieces that you know of that you'd like to promote?
Obviously, there's Romeo Juliet by Ana Maria, adapted by Ana Maria and directed by my close friends, Sophie Franco, who I love, who you should really have on this podcast. Can I swear?
I'll bleep it, but you can swear.
They can rock. So they're really great. They actually are in House of Sueños. They play the narrator. The attic is what they're called. It's their part. Yeah, and it's got a really good group of people. Just like some really awesome Seattle folks who are in it, and a couple of my Ashland peeps from down here are in it as well. And it's really exciting. And obviously it is via Zoom, which is like its own set of challenges and issues, but at the same time, I'm like, we're creating and telling a really beautiful version of the story about like queer Latinidad. And what does it mean to be Latino? What does it mean to speak Spanish? And what does it look like if in this world, you know, queer trans people just get to exist as they are, which I do. I just get to exist as I am, but sometimes other people are really worked up about it. I'm like, whoa, okay, Carol.
Carol, what's your problem with me, actually?
Yeah. I'm like, Carol, come on. Um, so
Carol,
it's
you need to take care of that in there, whatever that is. I don't know. I don't want
not
anything
about
to do with
me.
it.
Not
Jeez.
about me. So yeah, that I'm really excited about, and I'm thinking of some other projects, not that aren't my own, but that I'm really excited to see and to watch. And of course, right now, my brain is like a sieve. There's like nothing but like one piece of dust just
That's
floating
extremely
around.
relatable.
Yes.
So never fear. That happens to us all. So you kind of did it a little bit. You're like reading my mind. What's happening here? My very last and sneaky question is, who would you like to see on this podcast?
Oh, that's a great question. Obviously, Sophie Franco. I think they've just got such a great intuitive mind about the future and what the future of theater and Shakespeare. And they also work. They're a member of Washington Ensemble Theater. So they have kind of a great understanding of what canon means, because Wet does pretty much exclusively new plays. And so they're reading a bunch of new material, which is really awesome. They were also in West Side Story at the Fifth Avenue Theater. So you can even you could be like, May May wants to know what is it like for you, and they'll get really mad about that.
Exciting. We love
Yeah,
it.
they'll be like, eh. I think also Lamar Legend is another like really great Seattle actor, director, like just artiste extraordinaire. Yeah, those are. I think also too, if you have some designers, Megan Roach is who did the sound for House of Sueños. Chris Cherokee is a really, really talented costume designer. There's just there's so many people.
Yeah, man. That's why I really think anyone can talk about this topic. You know what I mean? Regardless of your relationship to theater or anything else. My brother works in animation and he is getting a kick out of this podcast. Like
Oh
you
yeah,
can.
Deidre Woods. That's another one. Deidre Woods. She's really tough. Sorry, I just
No,
was
you're
like,
good. No, it popped in. You had to tell it.
I
You
had
had
to
to
say
do
it.
it. You had to do it. Don't apologize. Where can people stay in touch with you or like see some of your stuff come out?
I have a website, memerosagarcia.com that you can go to. Also, you can follow me on my Instagram, which is Meme Rosa Garcia on IG. Those are kind of the two best places to find me.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I had a great time chatting with you.
Thank you. This was
It's
so much
so
fun.
yay. I'm glad you had a good time. I'm living my best life right now. This is amazing. You're fantastic and I'm so honored to have met you. Thank you so much. And thank you guys for listening to the next Canon podcast. We will see you next time. Goodbye.